his burdens get so heavy, and it seems I'm all alone. I cast my care on Jesus and come boldly to his throne. I find his grace sufficient when his promises I heed. For his very life he sacrificed, and he lives to intercede. He is the Lord of lords, and when he speaks, winds and waves obey. When Jesus whispers, peace be still, then darkness turns to day. And as I'm trusting in my Savior's word, doubts and fears all cease, and beneath the shelter of his wings I'm at rest in perfect peace.
I will seek for souls in darkness, Calvary's love with them to share. Empowered by his Spirit, I will follow anywhere.
For I know whate'er befall me, my Lord is in control. And as my mind is stayed on him, perfect peace he gives my soul. He is the Lord of lords, and when he speaks, winds and waves obey. When Jesus whispers, peace be still, then darkness turns to day. And as I'm trusting in my Savior's word, doubts and fears all cease, and beneath the shelter of his wings I'm at rest in perfect peace. He is the Lord of lords, and when he speaks, winds and waves obey. When Jesus whispers, peace be still, then darkness turns to day. And as I'm trusting in my Savior's word, doubts and fears all cease, and beneath the shelter of his wings I'm at rest in perfect peace.
Amen. Thank you for the song. It was a really beautiful song. Tonight we're going to be in the book of Ruth again. Surprise. If you've been coming, we've been in Ruth for a few weeks now, and we're getting close to the end. We've seen all the way from chapter 1. Now we're in chapter 4. This will not be the last message. There will be one more after this. So we're not going to cover all of the chapter, but we'll cover most of it. Before we read, though, I just want to kind of walk up to the passage with just thinking about what we've seen happen so far. Up to this point, we started with a family that lived in the nation of Israel, but at a bad time. It was characterized by sin and rebellion. And under the chastening hand of God, the family of Elimelech tried to escape the trouble in Israel, going over to Moab. And trouble followed them. They found tragedy and left behind Naomi as a widow. And then the two sons that got married, they also died. And the widow's lives are in peril. 3 women left behind. And we've seen then how the different responses that they had. That Ruth responded with great loyalty, though Naomi was bitter and hard. And then through the love of Ruth and the generosity and kindness of Boaz, both being a hand of God's love to Naomi, we've seen her start to change. And she kind of played a part. Not kind of, she did. She played a part in Ruth and Boaz's story, as we saw. The last scene when Naomi played matchmaker that we saw as Ruth talks to Boaz at the threshing floor. They agree they want to be married, but now they have to resolve the matter legally, because there's another kinsman involved. So we come to the passage looking to see what Boaz is going to do. So if you will stand with me, we'll start in verse 1 of chapter 4, and we'll read the first 13 verses. So starting in verse 1, it says, "Then went Boaz up to the gate, and sat him down there. And behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, and unto whom he said, Ho, such a one, turn aside and sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down, and he took 10 men of the elders of the city, and said, Sit ye down here. And they sat down, and he said to the kinsman, Naomi, that is come again out of the country of Moab, selleth a parcel of land, which is our brother Elimelech's. And I thought to advertise thee, saying, Buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. But if thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know, for there is none to redeem it besides thee, and I am after thee. And he said, I will redeem it. Then said Boaz, What day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. And the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar my own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. Now this was the manner in former time in Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing. For to confirm all things, a man plucked off his shoe and gave it to his neighbor, and this was a testimony in Israel. And we today usually sign contracts, then they exchanged sandals. So that's just the way they did it. And therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, Buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. And Boaz said unto the elders and unto all the people, Ye are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's from the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, I have purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among his brethren, from the gate of his place. Ye are witnesses this day. And all the people that were in the gate and the elders said, We are witnesses. The Lord make the woman that is come into thy house like Rachel and like Leah, which two did build the house of Israel. And do thou worthily in Ephratah, and be thou famous in Bethlehem. And let thy house be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bore unto Judah, of the seed of which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. So Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife. And he went in unto her, and the Lord gave her conception. She bore a son. The title for the message for this passage tonight is The Risky Yet Rewarding Reality of Loyal Love. And the reason for that is because love brings us to points of risk and sacrifice. But there is greater reward than the sacrifice made for loyal love. The risky yet rewarding reality of loyal love. Let's just pray one more time. Father, we really do want your blessing, and we expect to hear from your word tonight, Lord. So God, would you help us to receive what you have for us with open hearts, and we will thank you for it. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. You may be seated. Okay, it's confession time for me. I have seen a few Hallmark romance films. Yeah, I blame my parents. They watched them. What was I supposed to do? Just sit by myself? And I'm hoping I'm not the only one here. Is anyone, please, someone raise your hand. Have you ever seen anyone? There's a few? Okay, hopefully there's more than just that. Okay, I'm seeing more creep up. Yeah, no, I confess. You have to confess too. They're super, you're probably aware of the stories, even if you haven't seen them. They're super mushy love stories. And basically the plot of the movies is literally the same for everyone. Basically, it's just like different setting and different character names. Basically, the plot goes like this. There's a lady and a man who's kind of already involved, but their relationship's kind of dead and boring. And then that guy that was first with the lady, like he's usually kind of a businessy guy who loves money and stuff. And then this rougher, tougher guy kind of shows up on the scene, usually like a cowboy or something with big muscles and kind of rough around the edges. But, he's like more in touch with his emotions and stuff like that. And yeah. And then somehow the lady falls in love with the guy, and then They start this relationship, but then some challenge happens and the relationship's in peril, but then the man does something great and overcomes the challenge and wins the bride, and then the movie's over. And that's basically how they go. And I hate to say it, but there's actually some parallels. It's not exactly the same. There are some parallels here, actually, with there's the other kinsman here between Boaz and Ruth, and this guy's really interested in the money, and Boaz does what it takes to win his wife. And that's kind of as far as the parallel goes, because while the Hallmark movies are very, mushy romance, there is some romance in this book, but the love that the book of Ruth is focusing on is far greater than just a romance. It's loyal love, and loyal love can exist in all different kinds of relationships. It's a love that can be between both Ruth and Boaz, but it can also be between Ruth and Naomi, how Ruth was so loyal to Naomi, and how Boaz was loyal to Naomi as well. And that's the kind of love that really motivates and drives Boaz's actions. As we finished the message last week, we saw Ruth was coming back home to tell Naomi how things went. Boaz, while the sun was rising, first thing in the morning, he heads over into Bethlehem, into the city, where we see in verse 1, he comes up to the gate, it says. And the gate was kind of that part of the city where in order to leave the town or to go to come into the town, you would have to go through the gate. So if you were looking for someone, the gate would be the place to go. Also, it's the place where they would decide important legal matters. The councils would get together at the gate of the city. So Boaz wastes no time and goes to the best place possible to find the man. And just who do you think just so happens to come by at this time when Boaz gets there? And we learned, of course, in chapter 2 how to look at coincidences, that God's hand is really involved in it. And Boaz calls him out. He sees the kinsman come through, and Boaz says, "Ho, such a one." That's a funny way to say it, and it really is. It's kind of supposed to be funny. When he calls out his name, instead of it recording what his name is, it uses this phrase that means basically like so and so. In fact, I usually don't tell you like Hebrew words, but this one sounds so funny. I want to tell you. It's Ploni Almoni. It's like it kind of rhymes. It's supposed to kind of sound like our so and so, like hey so and so, basically. And the reason is like the author's almost purposely avoiding using his name when Boaz calls him out, because Boaz would have known his relative. They were close relatives. It wasn't that he didn't know his name, and that will be important later. Why the author left out his name, but for now we'll call him the other kinsman, or maybe just so and so. Call him old so and so. And Boaz calls him over to sit down in the gate, and then he calls the elders of the city, 10 men. He calls a quorum together to make sure that the case would be decided fairly and legally. That those witnesses could oversee and make sure that they're being fair about it, but then they would also function as witnesses later to if there were any disputes later, they would say, yes, this was the decision that was arrived at, and that's how they just did cases then. This is where they get kind of a little bit complex, that we could spend a long time kind of looking at the different customs and the way they did courts and trials and made legal decisions and stuff, but what I'm probably going to do is, even after this time, there might be some things that you don't fully understand. I don't fully understand it all either, but I'll try to highlight the important parts. So as we're going through looking at these details, it can get boring, but I promise I'm going to try to point out the ones that are important, that help us understand where we're going. So we'll just look through. After they sit down together in the gate, Boaz explains the situation to the other kinsmen and to the quorum. He tells them that Elimelech has died. Of course, they're aware of this at this point. Elimelech had passed away. Naomi had come back to the land of Israel, and now she's selling a parcel of land, is what he says. And basically, the best answer for what it means for Naomi to be selling the land is really she's calling out for one of her relatives who could be a kinsman redeemer to come and redeem the land. She doesn't really have rights. As a widow, as a woman, she didn't really have the rights to the land. So she would have to call out one of her kinsmen to be the redeemer of the land for her, so it could stay in the family. And Boaz is saying that's what's going on here. So since Elimelech has died, and you are next in line. Of course, the closer kinsman has first dibs on redeeming. So he's telling the kinsman, you're first in line. Basically what he's saying is, if you want to redeem it, then do that. It's your right. But if you don't, hurry up and make the decision, because I want to do it if you aren't going to. So his answer, you see in verse verse number 4. He says, I will redeem it. His answer is, I will redeem it. And it's quite an easy decision for him to make, actually. And the reason, again, I'm going to have to back up and kind of give you an idea of how land sales worked in Israel and why this is very important. The law that God gave his people in the covenant, he actually talked about selling land. Why is that? Because God's land, it was the promised land. It was God's inheritance for his people that he was promising to give them. When Joshua took possession of the land, if you remember, we went through Joshua last year, God told him how to divide up the land, and they divided up the land to the tribes of Israel, and then within those tribes, they divided it up per family, and families got their land. They had to conquer and settle their own land. You know, this is very important stuff, and they saw it as God himself gave us this land, and it was just a few generations before. So the land was still very much, they knew who owned which patches of land. Everyone knew. It was very important, and God intended for that land to stay in the family lines. It was their inheritance from him. And this is where it gets important. When someone sold a piece of land, say they hit hard times, they need some money, they sold their land, there was a 50-year event that would happen called the Jubilee. If they sold the land to another family, every 50 years at the Jubilee, the land would go back to the family that it started in. Even without no compensations for the people that owned it. It just, every 50 years, the land goes back to who it belonged to. So if someone else bought it, then later it's going back. And the reason is so that it stays in the family line. That's how important this is. God actually made laws for how the land would be exchanged. So the reason it's an easy decision is this. The kinsman knows that Elimelech has no living relatives or living descendants. If he buys the land, that land will never go back to Elimelech's line. He has no descendants. He increases his inheritance with no risk of losing inheritance. It just makes his bigger. A better chance or more inheritance for his kids, a better chance for his name to be famous in the area. It's only good. It's an easy decision to make. Yeah, I'll take the land. But then Boaz he plays the secret weapon, and he brings up Ruth, the Moabitess. He blinds the kinsman because he was ready to get the land, but he wasn't ready to talk about the widows. You could say maybe he didn't know about Ruth, but that's not likely because he's a closer relative than Boaz. And this is a small town. Everybody knew Naomi was back. Everybody knew Ruth was with her. He knew about the widows. It wasn't that he didn't know. He was just willing to kind of brush that aside, keep the widow thing under the table. We'll take the land, and the widows do their thing. But Boaz was, of course, he was not just concerned about the land. He really did care about the people involved. So he brings up Ruth and said, the day that you take the land, you're also going to take Ruth. Because the whole point of you being a kinsman redeemer is to raise up a son and to keep the land in the line that it started in. So if you have a chance to do that with Ruth, then it's your right. It's your responsibility, not just right, but your responsibility to try to raise up a son to inherit this land again, to keep it in the line of Elimelech. And this is where the man in verse 6, he says, basically, in that case, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar my own inheritance. There's a possibility here, now that he hears about Ruth, that maybe what he means is he just doesn't have enough. He just can't financially afford to take on Ruth and Naomi and take care of them. But more likely what he means is that if he takes Ruth, has a child with Ruth, he has the land, then his land, if think about this, if the son of Ruth was his only son, his inheritance, the inheritance of his family, would be lost in the line of Elimelech because he's raising up a son under Elimelech's name. So his would be lost. Not only that, but he would be joining his name with a Moabite. He would forever go down, as far as he knows, as the one who married a Moabite. He's passing down his land to a half-Gentile. He doesn't want to tarnish his reputation. His inheritance, his legacy, his name is on the line. And he says, I don't want to mar that. I'm not willing. Whatever his reason is exactly, the important part is this. When it came time for him to have the chance to redeem Elimelech's line, to keep Elimelech's name continuing forward, and to help Ruth and Naomi, it was too costly. It was too much for him to do. It would hurt his reputation. It would tarnish his legacy. He would lose his name eventually. And that was just too much. He was not willing to sacrifice that much. He'd take the land, but he did not want to be a redeemer. And in an effort for him to protect and preserve his own name, that's why he does this, to preserve his name, he's the only one in this passage, it seems like, that doesn't get his name mentioned. So-and-so. Just old so-and-so. And he did so much to just make sure his inheritance is not marred, and he lost it all. Forever forgotten. We don't know his name. He's only remembered as the one who wouldn't be a redeemer. But Boaz, he says, then I will redeem. He steps up into the redeemer role, and as this nameless kinsman passes off the scene, Boaz comes up as a shining hero whose name is still remembered. We're talking about him now tonight. He lived out loyal love by sacrificing, just like what the other kinsman wasn't willing to do. He wasn't willing to lose his name. He wasn't willing to put his own legacy on the line. It was the same for Boaz. Boaz had probably more to lose than the other kinsman, and he put it all on the line for love, for loyal love. Look at Boaz's answer in verses 9 and 10. He says, in the middle of verse 9, ye are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's of the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife. Here's why: to raise up the name, the legacy, the inheritance, the reputation of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead will not be cut off from among his brethren. Boaz, he emphasized to the elders, okay, he's saying, you're witnesses to this. This is the decision. I want you to call witness to this, and I want to make my intentions clear. I'm taking the land, and I'm marrying Ruth, and I'm doing it to raise up the legacy, the name of the Elimelech, who otherwise, if I don't do it, it will be lost forever. It will become irredeemable if I don't redeem it, and I'm going to. He had a lot more to lose than to gain here. He's losing, as far as he knows, his land, his inheritance is all going to Elimelech's line now. His name will be forgotten. He's losing it all. The things that were most important to men in those days, their name being passed on, their children carrying their name forward, the land that they owned, it will be lost, as far as he knows. And he did it for Elimelech, even though he was dead. For Mahlon, even though he was dead. For Ruth and Naomi, who were just poor widows that could do nothing for him. He would assume responsibility to protect them, Ruth and Naomi, to provide for them, to care for them. And he wasn't afraid of having his name attached to a Moabite woman. He cared more about her character than where she was from. And he was okay with having his name remembered alongside hers. And here's what he shows. His loyal love is risky business. He put his line on the line for his loyal love. He made a sacrifice, but it wasn't in vain. Look at how the elders responded. They pray for him. They don't just say they're witnesses, but they make a prayer for him in verse 11. The Lord make the woman that has come into thy house like the house of Rachel and Leah. And then they also go on to pray for him that they would be like the house of Judah and Tamar, who bore Pharez. And what they're praying for is that God would bless this marriage, bless this union, and that he would raise up a great house, that the blessing that went upon his father Judah, or his before him, many generations before, that the blessing of Judah would come upon his house. And we see that prayer is answered later on in David. We won't talk about that tonight, though. But that was their prayer. Also, that it says, do thou worthily in Ephratah and be thou famous in Bethlehem. They're basically praying, because of your virtue and your worthy deeds, we're praying that your name will be famous. It will be remembered in years to come, generations. And again, here we are talking about the name of Boaz tonight. The Lord rewarded Boaz way more than what Boaz put on the line. Way more. Boaz risked it all, and his reward is we look at Boaz tonight, here on the other side of the world, 3,000 years later, as a hero. That's crazy, because he sacrificed and put his own legacy on the line. And the Lord also blessed him with a son, Obed. God answered the prayer of the elders, and he rewarded Boaz with a great wife and a great son. And it's at this point, it draws our attention for just a moment back to Ruth. If you look at the verse 15, that's not really in our passage tonight, but I just want to read from it. This is the women talking to Naomi. In the middle of the verse, it says, for thy daughter-in-law, talking about Ruth, to Naomi, which loveth thee, is better than 7 sons. This is the wife that God had rewarded Boaz with. Boaz demonstrates this beautiful, loyal love, and he is matched by a woman who has also a beautiful, loyal love. She loved Naomi. Remember how she put everything on the line? Back when she had the chance to go back and hopefully get a husband back in Moab, she said, no, I'm going to put my future on the line for Naomi's sake and follow her wherever she goes, be with her always, and take care of her. She put her future on the line as well. And she's rewarded with a husband to match her character and a son. And it was really, God was able to bring together Ruth and Boaz because of their beautiful, loyal love. Otherwise, she never would have happened on the fields of Boaz. They never would have met. And really, this is where the story of Ruth and Boaz wraps up for the book. The book actually goes on a little bit more to talk about Naomi. But here, this is kind of the story winds down for them. And I just want to look kind of back over the last couple chapters to see what God's done in their lives. Ruth came to Israel as a poor widow, just hoping for survival at the best. Just a foreigner, a nobody in Bethlehem. But because of her bold and loving character, Boaz notices her. Their relationship develops. God used the generosity and the loyalty of Ruth to build a beautiful family. She who was barren and broken and had nothing now has abundance and a husband and will have a son. And God totally turned their story around. It is beautiful. The good hidden hand of God was behind the whole thing, orchestrating this romance. But again, more than just a romance, the story of love, this kind of loyal love was between each of the characters. All of them sacrificing for each other, looking out for the good of one another, committed to seeing God's blessing come on the lives of someone else. And that loyal love involved great risk for them, but was rewarded richly. The Lord always, He richly rewards His servants. As He richly rewarded Ruth and Boaz for their sacrificial loyalty and love in a way that lived beyond their lives. Boaz had Obed, and eventually down the line, there's David, and the story's carried forward. God, He rewards this kind of love so much because He values this kind of love. Because this is a very important character trait of God Himself. We see this kind of love and sacrifice as beautiful because in our hearts we know this is what God is like. God puts it in us to admire this kind of love because God loves people this way. And of course, the greatest demonstration ever of loyal love was when God gave His own life. Remember, when we were yet sinners, God commended His love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That's incredible loyal love. Even greater than Boaz, who saw Ruth's good character and wanted to redeem her, Jesus saw we were sinners and was still loyal. The loyalty of the love of God is far greater than any other love we've ever seen. And it's demonstrated beautifully on the cross. And this love of God is the calling for the life of a disciple of Jesus. The same loyal love. In Luke chapter 9, verse 23, Jesus said, if any man will come after me, he said to all of his disciples, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it. But whosoever will lose his life for my sake, the same shall save it. Whosoever will save his life, think about the kinsman who only wanted to protect his inheritance, loses it. Nameless. Gone. But whoever loses his life for my sake, saves it. That's where real life is. The life that you are able to sacrifice to follow the Son of God for the love of God, God will richly reward that and give you real life. Whatever it is that you lose to follow Jesus is not nearly as good as the reward that you'll see for following him. And it's not just for your good, though. Jesus, he died on the cross for others. He sacrificed his life for us. And to follow in his footsteps of taking up a cross and dying is not just for us, it's for others. Jesus' call is, come with me, come and sacrifice. Come and sacrifice with me. That's the way. That's the kind of love that we're called to. Loyal love denies self. It looks out for someone else's good. It's the kind of love that's an investment in someone else's life and someone else's good. If you protect and preserve your life from pain and loss, that's how you'll lose it. I want to read a quote from a man, C.S. Lewis. This is, I think, I've heard this quote, maybe even here, I don't remember for sure, but this is a really powerful quote about this kind of love. He says, there is no safe investment. To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in a casket of your or a coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love it all is to be vulnerable. You can protect yourself, or you can love other people. The only way to outlive your life, the only way to make your life really count past yourself, is to invest it into someone else. We can't love too much. We can't sacrifice too much. I think there's an idea out there today that tells us, love other people, but be careful that you don't give everything away for other people. Like, you got to protect yourself some. Like, love other people, but make sure that you don't give away too much of yourself. You'll have nothing left to give. You'll ruin your life. And there are seeds of truth in it that if you aren't taking care of your own health and your own well-being, it's going to be hard to take care of someone else. That's true. But the kind of love that we're called to is still ultimate self-sacrificial love. And we can be sure that God will restore us and will renew us. If you aren't loving people in the power of Christ, then you can't love like that. You can't ultimately sacrifice. But if the love of God is shed abroad in our hearts by the Holy Ghost, like Romans 5 tells us, then we are renewed and refreshed and refilled by the love of God himself. When we have nothing left to give, God sustains us. He renews us. He loves us. You can't love people too much. If your love never costs you, never hurts you, never puts you out of your comfort zone, or never makes you tired, you should wonder, do you really love people that much? If you can never sacrifice for someone else's good, or if you complain every time someone else inconveniences you, you should wonder, is my love where it should be? Love takes risks and makes sacrifices for other people. Imagine if Ruth had turned back with Orpah instead of being loyal and loving to Naomi. we'd have no book of Ruth. Or if Boaz hadn't been willing to redeem and sacrifice his line for Ruth and Elimelech's line, there would be no story here. We'd have no example. Loyal love requires this kind of sacrifice in order for there to be a reward. It's risky, but it's rewarding. God's love was costly for him. It cost him himself. He lost his life. He sacrificed everything. And it wasn't without reward, though. He has died, but his reward for dying has been to save sinners and redeem us for the glory of his name. He counts us as his reward, which is also remarkable. But his love has been rewarded. And he rewards those who are his faithful servants. I know it might make it a little nervous about talking about getting rewards for being loyal, because we might think, well, I don't do good or do right to get stuff in return. And that's true. If you do good for other people, if you do try to do right in order to get good back, well, that's, like Jesus said, well, then you have your reward. That's what you get. But we see with the eyes of faith that God knows our sacrifice, and we can trust that God gives good rewards. You like rewarding your children or someone for doing good? Do you think we're better than God? No. We like to reward people for doing good. So much more does God want to reward us for being the sort of people he wants us to be. It's okay for us to trust God will reward. It's not just about us. It's about God's goodness. He wants to reward us. Loyal love, these sort of sacrifices, though we can't just talk about them in the abstract and way out there in the world. It only exists in real life. It can't just exist in your head. It can't just be word and tongue, like 1 John says. It must be deed and truth. So what does that look like for us? I am thankful. I see here in this church often and frequently and abundantly a lot of loyal love. I really do believe I do. And I'm so thankful for those examples. I think a great example of this is simply missions giving. It really does take some sacrifice to write checks or put cash in the offering plate, giving to missionaries who maybe you've met the missionaries before, but you'll probably never see the reward even here on earth for the money you're giving, and yet you make the sacrifice. But the reward is great. For those people who hear the gospel, who wouldn't have heard it otherwise, that's a great reward. And you will, Lord, you'll meet them someday. It's worth the sacrifice. Any ministries or volunteering that you do around here at church, it takes time. It might put you out of your comfort zone. There's a little bit of sacrifice there. But there's a reward. When God has a church that's loving and stewarding what they have well, he's able to trust them with more and to use them more. So the more we love, the more we're rewarded with God giving us more opportunity. I didn't think of this before, but men's advances, there's some sacrifice there. It'll take some work, and we're not really taking up a big offering, I don't think, to try to get more back than we put into it. I don't think that's the goal there. It's a sacrifice, but God will reward it. God will use it. And any ministry that you do personally or the church does as a whole. But also in the family, I think of people who sacrifice the most are probably parents. Dads, you sacrifice for your kids. I don't think you can be a dad and not sacrifice. I don't think it's possible. You work hard and you invest in your kids and you train them up right, and it takes a lot of work. I don't think it's possible to be a dad and not sacrifice, but I think it's possible to sacrifice as a dad and forget that there is a reward. It's not in vain. The work and the sacrifice that you make, it will come with a son, with a daughter that's raised up right, that loves you and remembers you. So keep working hard and training and doing what you can, because God will reward that kind of loyal love. And moms sacrifice so much for their children. And it's a terrible shame that our culture seems to put that kind of love down, as if a woman is as if she's less for maybe not going out in the world and having a career, as if that's putting a woman lower down on the scale. No, that is not. A woman who sacrifices for her children If the greatest thing she does is raise kids, then she did great. That's awesome. I'm thankful for a mom who I had who invested her life in me and my siblings. And I know you moms do that. You love your kids, so don't forget that there's a reward. God sees your sacrifice. I read this week, something that a lady that I went to school with, she wrote this and posted it online, and I saw it, and I thought, this is perfect. And it's not so much a blessing to me as I thought maybe some of you moms would appreciate this. It's just just a paragraph here. She wrote, 6 times. That's how many times I walked out of the service last night with a baby in my arms or holding one of my toddler's hands, sometimes both. And this is the season I'm in. Maybe it's the season you're in too. The season of possibly being a distraction at times, the season of sit still and shh, the season of being physically present on a pew but maybe only hearing a few words that have been spoken. Mom, God sees your sacrifice during the season, and he honors your sacrifice during the season. It says, my kids are not perfect in church, and I don't expect them to be. I don't expect anyone's kids to be. Just bring them. When they're noisy and when they cry, when they grow restless, just bring them to church. A growing church needs children, and growing children need church. I thought that was just a really well-written quote. That being said, children, they need a church. And I see families in this church, another way they sacrifice is not just taking care of their own kids, but investing in the lives of someone else's kids. And that's awesome. Some families here, they take kids into their own home that aren't even their own, or even if it's just ministering and teaching in Sunday school or children's church or junior church or whatever it is, whatever capacity. That is awesome to see a church who cares about children and who invests in them. The greatest way to invest your life is in other people. That's the way to make your life count, to make your life outlive yourself. And who better to do that than the young ones? The younger kids, they're going to live longer than you probably. Make your life count. Invest in them. But it's not just the young ones that we love. I know there are some elderly folks that they need care too. I know some people here, they are caring for older parents or other family members who need help, who need care. And that can be an interruption in your life. That can kind of disrupt things. It's not getting you anything. You're not getting a big gain out of taking care of someone that's older that needs help. But it's not just about what you get, of course. You do it for their good. You make sacrifices and you care for them and you look after them. And God sees that. And he rewards it. He loves to see people love like that. And there's room for more of this kind of love. There's always room for more. God can enable us and give us strength and ability to love and to sacrifice in all of our relationships. If you find yourself, though, after you've sacrificed and you've made yourself available to sacrifice for other people, between the sacrifice and the reward, remember, there's still a reward coming. God sees loyal love, and he will reward it. God may reward you richly like he rewarded Boaz with the son Obed, and he got to see that blessing. Or, you know what Boaz probably never got to see? Was that he was the great-grandfather of King David. He probably didn't live to see that, I'm sure. There might be blessings, there might be rewards that come way after you even lived. Either way, if you're faithful, you'll hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. What better reward than that? God writes the final chapters of the stories of his children, and he writes good books. He does a good job. There will be great rewards at the end of a life that has demonstrated loyal love. And I think a beautiful example of this is the story of Jim Elliot again. We talked a little bit about Jim Elliot way at the beginning of the first message, but I focused on his wife and the wives of the other missionaries. I didn't really focus much on the men, Jim Elliot and his crew. There were 5 of them, and if you weren't there for that, basically the story goes is they went to be missionaries in Ecuador. They were reaching the native people of Ecuador. They were working for years, just ministering to witnessing to people and baptizing them and making disciples of them, planting churches, doing a great work. But God moved them to go to another tribe that was just way out there. There's never been any contact other than violence from that tribe to other people. Very risky. And they sacrificed a lot up to this point already. They sacrificed the comforts of America. They had sacrificed everything good in their lives. And they go, by God's leadership, to this tribe, risking their lives to see them come to Christ. They loved them even though they didn't even know them. They put everything on the line for these people, and what was their reward? They were killed. They lost everything. They ultimately lost everything. And all they had done for God, in one sense, it was all lost. But in another sense, there was a reward that came after they passed. There were countless people who surrendered to gospel ministry and to missions after they heard that story. Many people. We don't know even how that story may have affected us because of people who have surrendered to the ministry, who have surrendered to preach and to go into the world because of that story. We may have been affected by some of those people. And that reward was great. And if those men had known what would come of it, they would have said it's worth it. It's worth the sacrifice. It's worth the loss because that is a great reward. And that tribe that they went to reach anyways, even though they killed them, ultimately, that tribe, the whole tribe came to know Christ. They all got saved. Again, the reward, it was worth the sacrifice. There was great pain and great loss, but God rewarded it. And I'm sure those men, when they saw the Lord, heard, "Well done, my good and faithful servants." Well done. So are you willing to sacrifice for loyal love to see great reward? Let's stand with our